this meeting. I will say it again for the record. Why don't we go ahead and call this meeting to order? I am standing in for Chair Rogers, who is unable to make it today. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call and any teleconference disclosures.
Good afternoon. Let's start with Director Melanie Happy.
Present.
Director Janice Cater-Thompson.
Present.
Director Chris Corsi. Here. Director Susan Hardy.
Here.
Director Nisa Hinton.
Here.
Director Ariel Kelly.
Here.
Director Sandra Lowe. Director Jeff McCarthy.
Here.
Director David Rabbit.
Here.
Director Rosa Reynosa. And Vice Chair Hopkins.
Present.
And I do not see any members of the board on teleconference either.
Perfect. Thank you so much for confirming. With that, we will move on to public comment on items not on the regular agenda. Drew, would you lead us in that?
I currently do not see any members of the public wishing to speak on items not on the agenda, nor did I receive any pre-submitted public comments also.
Thank you very much. That will bring us to the consent calendar. Are there any members of the board who wish to remove anything from the consent calendar or have any edits or corrections? Seeing none, I would see if there are any public comments on the consent calendar, either in person or via Zoom.
No members of the public have their hands raised on this item.
Thank you so much. I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the consent calendar. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Drew, would you mind taking a roll call vote on that?
Director Backey.
Aye.
Director Thompson.
Aye.
Director Corsi.
Yes.
Director Hardy.
Yes.
Director Hinton.
Aye.
Director Kelly.
Aye.
Director O'Cutty.
Aye.
Director Rabbit.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Hopkins.
Yes.
You can see that.
Thank you so much. And that brings us on to our regular calendar item. So our first will be SCTA project delivery update from Shauna Gauss. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I love your festive colors and sounds.
Try to keep that to a minimum. Thank you. Thank you, directors. We just make sure this is up and running before I get going. I'm Shauna Gauss, Senior over Programming Projects. I have the next couple of items on the agenda.
And I apologize for mispronouncing your last name.
That's
Duly
okay. It
noted.
happens to me all the time. You got the first one right, and that's
All
the
right.
important part. I'll start with a summary. The SCTA has had 3 major programming actions in the last few years. The SCTA funding program cycle 1 was meant to combine the call for as many sources as possible to put the funds to the best use based on the program's requirements. There were a couple of programming events that were required earlier action than that of the SCTA funding program, and those were the State Transportation Improvement Program, the Coronavirus Response Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, and Local Partnership Program, and Quick Strike, which was part of the One Bay Area Grant Cycle 2. So the Quick Strike, and I'm going to move to the next slide here. Where am I pointing it? There we go. There we go. So the Quick Strike included 6 jurisdictions that were selected in Sonoma County to receive that funding. The funds were intended for projects that were ready to go and quickly deliverable. In addition to those earlier actions, the SCTA funding program requested project sponsors' top 5 priority projects, and in response to that call, SCTA received 65 applications. Which direction? I'm still not clear. Where am I pointing it? There we go. So as we reported in July of 2022, the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program was seeking applications earlier than when the SCTA anticipated proposing projects for the One Bay Area Grant Cycle 3. So SCTA partnered with the transit agencies to submit several of the projects that had been submitted for the funding program as a TIRCIP grant application, totaling more than $24 million. And the awards were announced and the application was awarded its full request. So in August of 2021, a call for projects was issued for the first cycle of the SCTA funding program, which was an amalgamation of funding sources that allowed a balanced approach to funding the jurisdiction's highest priority needs. The projects were evaluated on multiple criteria and selected by means of an overall score, eligibility for the funding programs that were available, regional and local goals and metrics with an eye toward geographic equity. In September of 2022, this board approved a balanced list of projects that provided for a multimodal investment approach. MTC approved all but 2 of the projects that were submitted for consideration of the STP CMAQ, that is State Transportation Program and Surface Transportation Program and Congestion Management Air Quality Funding. And that was requested, and all 65 million that was available as part of the SCTA funding program was programmed in February of 2023. This slide shows the investment percentages by mode of that whole funding exercise that we just talked about, and it includes the TIRCIP funds. So 28% went to transit capital, 38% went to bicycle and pedestrian projects, 12% went to pavement, 20% went to traffic operations, and 2% went to transit operations. This slide shows the investment per jurisdiction for the recent programming that I was just detailing. And I'll just leave that on the screen for a minute so you can check it out. There we go. So the report in your agenda packet shows what has been obligated since staff's last report in June. We do try to bring this update to you twice a year. So once in January and then again, or I mean, once in December and once in June. But there are a couple of notations that I'd like to make. As part of the most recent cycle of the One Bay Area grant, each jurisdiction was required to have an updated and accepted housing and community development certification. Many of the jurisdictions across the Bay found themselves waiting for such a certification just prior to the start of the federal fiscal year. MTC requirements state that the certification had to be approved no later than December 31st of this year, or the jurisdiction would lose eligibility to receive federal funds through MTC. In September, before approval of the annual obligation plan, if a jurisdiction had funds programmed in federal fiscal year 23-24 and did not yet have an HCD compliance certification, MTC moved the project out of the annual obligation plan. Each non-compliant jurisdiction still had to the end of the year to achieve approval of their HCD certification, but they would not be given priority for processing through Caltrans local assistance. Those jurisdictions have now achieved HCD certification approval. Oh, those that have are still in the Transportation Improvement Program, otherwise known as the TIP, and can request obligation and will be processed beginning in February, or they may choose not to obligate until next federal fiscal year. Each Sonoma County jurisdiction is now in compliance. However, this scenario does apply to a county project that is located at the intersection of Todd and Standish. Todd Road and Standish Road. Of additional note, Healdsburg was selected for receiving ATP funding in May of this year. And finally, SMART was selected to receive approximately $6.1 million in the Interregional Transportation Program funds for the multi-use pathway from Guerneville Road to Airport Boulevard. And I apologize, this is pretty tiny. But I will say that to summarize, I'd like to provide some context to the listing that is contained in your agenda packet. So staff has developed the funding obligation history for each jurisdiction in Sonoma County that has federal or state funding programmed in the last 10 or 15 years, and that falls under SCTA's purview. Each page provides a history of these funding obligations per jurisdiction. And the first page of the group provides a list of the funding sources that looks like this, that's shown on your screen here. Of the funding sources covered and a glossary of acronyms that are used in the listing. The green highlight shows the newest programming and the red text shows updates since the report was given in June. And with that, hand it back over to
I do have to say, I would propose an edit to that slide. How to read the report. Step 1, get binoculars.
Hopefully it's easier to read in your agenda
Yeah.
packet than it is on the screen. I apologize for that.
No, thank you so much for an excellent and thorough report, Shauna. I really appreciate it. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment either in person or online for this item? Seeing none, I would bring it back to the board for any questions or comments. Director Corsi.
Thank you. Shauna, could you go back to the Standish and Todd project and tell me what's the
Can
next
you do that
step?
for me, Ross?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next step.
So county does have its HCD certification, and because it was taken out of the annual obligation plan, they can choose to move forward with it in February if they're ready, but in consultation with Sonoma County PI staff, I believe that they are going to seek funding in the next federal fiscal year, because they still have to get themselves through the environmental compliance process.
But the option was to,
Either obligate, you can submit a request for authorization in February once it opens up to statewide obligations, or you can wait until the beginning of the next federal fiscal year, which starts on October 1st.
so do both of those involve competitive applications? or
No, they've
neither-
already
neither
done
does?
that. They've already done that. That's how they got the funding in the first place.
Just a matter of
So
time.
it's just a matter of going through the Caltrans obligation process, the Caltrans local assistance, federal obligation process.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Yeah, Director Bagby.
So is it, Shauna, is it a similar situation with the smart pathway as well? As far as just,
Smart.
what will the
has-
timing be on that?
So I would have to check. I'm not sure which year that funding is programmed, but they were given the award, so it's whenever they're ready to move forward, given when it was, what year it was programmed in.
Great,
And
thank
I
you.
apologize, I don't know that off the
Nope,
top
nope.
of my head, but I can get it for you.
No problem. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, that is just a sort of receive and file. So I will hand it back over to you for item 5.2. Go Sonoma.
Thank you very much. Sure. I'm just gonna wait while Ross brings up that next presentation. This is very exciting because we've been working on this for a while, so we're happy to bring you this draft. So this presentation is for the draft Go Sonoma Strategic Implementation Plan. And I'd like to acknowledge a few and thank a few of the staff members before I move on. First of all, David Ripperda, who provided direction, support, and editing, as well as development of chapters 3 and 5. Brendan Hare, who created a whole new cash flow model for us on the new measure. Ross Clendenin, who put together the project information sheets more than once at our request because needs change. Adam Garcia, who produced each one of the maps to help give a uniform look and size for the public's use, and to Drew Nichols, who makes each of our documents not only ADA accessible, but also usable. We couldn't have done that. We couldn't have brought this to you without each of them. So thank you very much. So to give a little bit of background, Go Sonoma Act was passed by the voters as Measure DD on November 5th, 2020. And it is an extension of the existing quarter-cent sales tax known as Measure M. Go Sonoma was approved by 71% of the voters, well above the 2/3 threshold needed to pass. Go Sonoma will pick up just as Measure M sunsets in 2025. And the ordinance establishing the act requires that a strategic implementation plan be prepared by December of 2023. So what's different about Go Sonoma from Measure M? In the apportionment programs where Measure M had 20% for road maintenance and rehabilitation, Go Sonoma has 38%. With no increase in the existing maintenance of effort requirements. Where Measure M had 10% for transit operations, Go Sonoma has 23%. The competitive programs make up the remainder of Go Sonoma with 27% for moving traffic and improving safety and 12% for building bikeways and pathways. In Measure M, only 4% of the measure was singled out for bike ped improvements. In Measure M, local street projects required a 1-to-1 match of local funding, and the bicycle and pedestrian projects didn't require a match at all. In Go Sonoma, all competitive projects require a 15% match of local funding. New to the Go Sonoma measure is a proposal for a capacity building program that will use 5% of the combined move traffic and improve safety and build bikeways and pathways programs to provide support to project sponsors to aid in things like preparing grant applications, technical studies, and public engagement. The program is meant to evolve to fit the needs of the funding program applications as the grants become available. So it will necessarily start off small, but as the measure matures, how those funds will get used will become better defined. In addition, the Build Bikeways and Pathways program, there is funding for set aside for Vision Zero, Safe Routes to School, and other efforts that total 1% of the total measure. In the apportionment program for transit, there are also new programs meant to enhance transit operator assistance programs such as first and last mile, commuter, and transportation demand management programs, and that's 3% of the measure. The uses of this funding will be further defined through the preparation of a TDM master plan next fiscal year. And the measure also identifies up to 2% of each operator's apportionment that may be used to supplement or instigate fare-free programs, and these funds will be available to the operators on a reimbursement basis. So the layout of the plan generally follows the layout of the previous Measure M strategic plan. Chapter 1 is the executive summary. Chapter 2 is the background. Chapter 3 is the strategic approach and programming. Chapter 4 is where we find the policies and procedures. Chapter 5 is the financial plan and cash flow model. And Chapter 6 is the project information sheets. And the appendices included are for resources and references for users. That'll provide a little bit more detail on each one of the chapters. So Chapter 1 is the executive summary. It provides an overall overview of the plan format and the purpose. Chapter 2 is the summary of where we've been with Measure M and where we're going with Go Sonoma. Chapter 3 starts to get into the meat of the plan with the general financial approach, revenue forecasting, which also contains historical data for comparison, and the initial programming for the competitive programs that were included in the first cycle of the SCTA funding program. Chapter 3 includes specific information about the apportionment programs, including the formulas used to derive the shares and percentages for each of the programs. Chapter 3 also shows the programming of the first project selected for funding from the competitive programs, being Move Traffic and Improve Safety and Build Bikeways and Pathways. It should be noted that for this program and the next competitive program, the Move Traffic and Improve Safety, and the next program, which is Build Bikeways and Pathways, the number of projects being proposed in the early years of Go Sonoma will be able to be advanced through the use of interfund loans with Measure M. The second competitive program that I mentioned of projects is the Build Bikeways and Pathways, and these lists and their programming amounts are included in Chapter 3. Chapter 4 contains all of the policies and procedures. Some of the things covered in this chapter include how and when apportionment programs are distributed and requirements for implementing the competitive programs, as well as the reporting and maintenance of effort requirements. Chapter 4 also describes how interfund loans can be approved between Measure M and Go Sonoma to allow advancing projects. Chapter 5 is currently a bit of a placeholder. Since no funds have been collected yet, there are no actual funds to show, but it has been populated with the estimates that are included from chapter 3 for the life of the measure. The chapter will grow after collection for the new measure begins. And chapter 6 contains all of the information sheets for the projects selected to be funded with the Go Sonoma funding so far. The chapter will also grow as we have more calls for projects and select new projects to receive funding. These pages are meant to be dynamic and will be updated online, likely on a quarterly basis, but the sheets that are contained in the plan are a one-stop shop of information, but they are indeed static until the plan gets updated. The requirement is to update the plan no less than every 5 years, but with Measure M, we've managed to do it every couple of years, give and take a year here or there. And the appendices contain the resources and references for all users, both SCTA and project sponsors. This is the place to find the voter pamphlet ballot information, all of the templates and for the project sponsors that include both the cooperative agreements and the reporting letter. And because Go Sonoma is competitive, the evaluation criteria have been placed here for reference and use in applying for new funding in the next cycle. So that completes my overview. SCTA staff are giving this presentation, or we have given this presentation to the TAC last week, and we are giving it to the board today. We are seeking feedback and direction on the overall layout of the document and the approach of the plan. Staff will incorporate changes and present the document in a more polished version to the committees in January and February, and then to the board for approval in March of next year. And I'm happy to take direction or answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item?
I currently do not see any members of the public with our hands up.
Thank you so much, Drew. So I'll bring it back to the board. Questions, comments, unbridled excitement over the fact that we met our deadline, December of 2023, and here we are on December 11th, getting this across the finish line. Nothing like a deadline to motivate you. So, Director Bagby.
I just, it was almost like you were kind of going through the movie credits at the beginning, because when you really look at the document, you see what a team effort this really took. And I think I can really see transitioning from Measure M to Measure DD. I mean, so much of the technology has changed. The team has probably changed. The focus and the calculations have all changed. So you've really had to just reinvent this animal from the ground up. I think it's a great draft and very understandable, very clear and very understandable. I mean, to the point where I just think that, just kind of a casual person who suddenly, is interested in bike lanes or, fare free programs, we can point them right to this and say, this is the framework. And I do have just kind of a pet question, which may or not be appropriate in reference to the document. And you can follow up with me later, but I was wondering how the funding that will be available for fare-free programs, just how it will materially sort of change, like what will really change. And for instance, how the city of Cloverdale provides the free shuttle, the city of Sebastopol provides the free shuttle. Is there any real material change in how that's going to be different under Measure DD?
Those are eligible where they're called out specifically, because right now Measure M just is an appropriation or an apportionment amount, and they get it and they can spend it on operations.
Right.
And this allows them to call out fare-free programs and say, we implemented this much in fare-free that we would like to be reimbursed for. So they'll get an apportionment, and then they'll be able to, at the end of the year, submit an invoice to us and say, this is what we spent on fare-free programs, and we'd like to be reimbursed for that as well, up to a certain 2% of their apportionment amount.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments from my colleagues? I had a couple of sort of high level overview questions, which is I definitely have conversations with constituents out in West County, and the sort of original projects that were proposed under the Mike Riley, may he rest in peace, era were actually not well supported by the community, such as sort of an alteration and like a rediversion of Highway 116 around Forestville. And so in this measure, we have the opportunity to instead look at bike and pedestrian infrastructure to sort of create the same kind of an opportunity for bikes and cyclists and pedestrians to have, a safe route through and around downtown without being impacted by that highway traffic. But folks are kind of asking, well, what happened to that original earmarked funds that were sort of never spent? So how would you answer that question if you were approached at a town hall in Forestville by someone being like, I voted for this thing so many years ago, it never happened, where's my money? Basically.
So there's a
Asking
long,
for a friend.
so there's
Yeah.
a long version and a short version. I'm gonna try to go with the short version and then you can tell me if you want more detail, but the project funding in Measure M didn't go away. It's been repurposed based on a revision, an amendment to the expenditure plan that this board approved a couple of, it was just earlier this year or last year. And so that $2 million is still available and is planned to be spent. It is not intended to be spent because we heard the constituents and they don't want the Forestville bypass. So that was changed based on a request from the county and county staff to amend what was eligible under that project specific definition. So the funding is still available, and it's going to be spent on improvements that have been identified by current constituents as a higher priority than the bypass itself.
Great. So essentially just sort of saying that it was the transfer and sort of the action that the board previously took, and in combination with sort of Measure DD, your money's not going away. It's there. We're going to move forward. Great. Thank you. By the way, the bypass would have gone basically through an affordable housing development and also a bunch of wetlands. So there were multiple challenges with that project aside from community sentiment. And then my other question is, we have this great list of projects. There are always more projects than we have funding for. What is sort of left for projects that we haven't yet identified that could be identified through our active transportation plan, for instance, which I think we received a lot of interest in. And so what is sort of the, I guess, not yet spent or not yet earmarked dollars for future initiatives?
So not yet spent or earmarked, that's money that hasn't been collected yet. So we have the first 2 years of Measure DD or Go Sonoma already identified, and those were projects that were evaluated. But there are still the highest priority projects, and staff is working with all of your staffs to make sure that we have the most current information on those projects that weren't selected for the SCTA funding program. And those are going to be considered for the next round of funding that's coming up. We have some STIP funding that's coming up that the board recently approved, a swap with MTC funding recently, RM3 money. And so that will be happening at the beginning of the year. We're going to sit down with all of the project sponsors and say, what have you got that still needs to move forward? Are these priorities still your highest priorities? And where do we go from here? Also, staff is working on the active transportation plan, the countywide active transportation plan. And so there's a generation of projects being assembled through that process, and that can also be incorporated into that next round.
Great. And I would imagine that also all the work with Vision Zero will kind of feed into that active transportation, and wonderful. Thank you so much. Last call for comments or questions. Thank you so much for all of your work on this. And I believe that we are waiting for a motion on this one because I think this is a formal action.
So grab it.
Second.
And Drew, would you mind taking a roll call vote on this?
Second.
Thank you. Director Bagby,
Aye.
Director Peter Thompson,
Yes.
Director Corsi,
Yes.
Director Hardy,
Yes.
Director Hinton,
Aye.
Director Kelly,
Aye.
Director Okrepke,
Aye.
Director Rabbit,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Hopkins.
Yes, thank you so much for all of your work and the work
Thank
of
you.
all of the amazing cast of characters, as Melanie put it, movie credits, right, at the beginning. I know that it's been a huge team effort. And by the way, I want to also say I'm so excited about the 5% for the capacity building, which is something I thought I would never, ever say in my whole life, because I never understood that when I was on the other side of the coin fighting for these things. And I think it's going to be so great to have those kinds of resources available, particularly for some of our less well-resourced jurisdictions. So super exciting about that. Thank you so much. So that moves us over to the RCPA portion of our agenda, and I will be handing it over to Tanya to start off with our climate ad hoc update.
Good afternoon, directors. So I would like to give you a brief update on the climate ad hoc, which took place on November 29th. And then we are seeking direction from the board in terms of the next steps that the climate ad hoc has recommended. So just to recap briefly where we've been and where we're at, as a reminder, we did a poll in June of this year to evaluate voter interest or support for some type of revenue measure in 2024. And the poll returned results that were not encouraging or supportive of moving forward with that sales tax or parcel tax, but it did show strong public support for climate action. And so in addition to, or actually in preparation for that poll, we also have a really strong list of project lists that our 3 program committees put together. So we have a transportation project list, a buildings project list, and a land and water project list, as well as priorities that were expressed or shared during a community meeting that we've held. So we have a really good set of information that we can use to look for, to help inform future funding searches. And then lastly, we have been advocating for the inclusion of funding for climate resilience districts, of which RCPA is currently the only CRD in the state, but we imagine there will be others forming, but to advocate for the inclusion of funding for the CRDs in the potential climate bond. So that's another action that we've been pursuing. So I wanted to give just a brief reminder of the funding outlook for RCPA. As you may recall from your approval of our 23-24 budget, we have 2 major sources of funding for RCPA. One comes from ABEG MTC for our role in the Marin programs, and that is really the lion's share of our budget. And then we have the remaining funds that come from our local sources and some state grant money that supports our core programs. So those are programs like the support we provide to your jurisdictions, coordinating climate action across the county, doing the communications and a variety of other support efforts. And so the member and partner contributions that come from all of your jurisdictions and our partner agencies make up the majority of that at about 87%. And then you see a small slice of the pie comes from grants, and that's certainly an area that we continue to look for ways to grow that slice of the pie, as well as some other smaller sources of funding. And so our current viable funding opportunities in the absence of some type of revenue measure really are the member and partner contributions, and then those multi-jurisdictional grants and the climate bond advocacy. So just to give a kind of a refresh of our funding outlook. And then the board also expressed interest in kind of understanding what our near-term roadmap is in terms of the climate action projects that the RCPA with our partners can support in the short term with the funding that we have available. And so categorize those projects in the 3 major areas that we looked at as part of the polling. So in transportation, the strong interest and focus in improving bike ped infrastructure and transit. So we have some really exciting work underway with the Countywide Active Transportation Plan, and also the bike ped updates that are happening in Santa Rosa and Petaluma. We have our transit integration study. And then lastly, with a recent grant from Caltrans, we are launching a VMT mitigation program. And that is something that was called out in our mobilization strategy as well. So I'm really encouraged that we have that funding. And then in the building space, you'll hear in the next item from VC about our proposal to launch a countywide equitable building electrification action plan, really pulling together a lot of information that we already have, as well as some new information, and putting a plan together that we can better coordinate our activities in this area countywide. And then lastly, there's 2 projects in the land and water space that we're partnering with a number of other organizations locally. So there's the carbon sequestration through compost application pilot that's funded through the county's Climate Resilience Fund, and we're partnering with a number of partners there. And then the recent grant from the USDA that is being administered through the county to support the Sonoma, Marin, Ag and County Climate Coalition. So just to note that we are doing work, really good work with the funding that we have. Of course, we'll constantly look for additional funding. And then this slide here is a list of potential projects. And some of this really comes from the interest that we're hearing from your jurisdictions in terms of opportunities for countywide focused action. So the first is to develop a regional microgrid strategy. We do have a grant application into the state through their ICARP Regional Resilience Program. We expect to hear back on that grant, should be this month. So we'll definitely keep you posted on that. And then we're in the process of working with staff from your jurisdictions as well as the county to apply to a Caltrans Sustainable Communities Climate Adaptation Program for a regional resilient and equitable EV charging plan. So really looking at how we can address the needs to get charging out into our most vulnerable communities and the types of issues that we need to address to create that as a really resilient infrastructure. And then lastly, we've also heard interest, and we're seeing this in the climate action plans that your jurisdictions are developing for those that are working on those plans, and interest in doing some more work around urban forest planning and implementation. We don't yet have any grant sources identified for that, but that's one that we're keeping our eyes open for. So this next slide is just a brief recap of the funding options that RCPA, actually it's a full list of funding options that are out there that we know of. And then of those funding options, there's really 3 that SCTA RCPA has the authority to pursue. So with our climate poll that we did, we basically ruled out the parcel tax and sales tax, at least in the foreseeable future, based on the results of that poll. And then the third option here is a vehicle registration fee, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. So that's just a brief recap there. And then there are a couple of other options that have come up both from members of the community presented to this board in previous meetings, as well as from your board in discussions as well. So there's an idea of an airport passenger fee, but unfortunately, this is not something that we have the legal authority to do, and the county could do this either. The federal law prohibits the county from imposing this type of fee. There's a notion of a luxury tax, and there are examples of this type of tax elsewhere in California. So an example of that would be a one-time additional transfer tax on the sale of properties over a certain dollar amount. And then there's a transient occupancy tax. So the ad hoc took these different options. And one of the options that came up, well, actually, sorry, let me go. There's 2 more that I wanted to share. There's collaborating with other agencies. And this is something this board has brought up as well in the past. So the idea of working with our partner agencies, specifically Ag and Open Space and Regional Parks, as they're looking at renewing their measures, and I have the expiration dates there listed. Are there opportunities to update those expenditure plans to include more funding for climate-related projects, which would mostly be in the land and water space, given the charters of those organizations? And we did have Misty Arias and Burt Whitaker in our climate ad hoc to talk about this concept, and they were very supportive. And then there would be a question about RCPA's role. So would these measures be able to bring in funding for RCPA? Would they bring in funding for projects that those organizations would lead and manage? And that would all be up for discussion. And so there was, definitely interest in pursuing additional conversations here. And I think it's, excellent idea to partner with these other agencies. So the ad hoc discussed those various options. And then one that kind of came back up for discussion as an area of strong interest is the idea of doing moving forward with the vehicle registration fee, or evaluating the feasibility of a vehicle registration fee. And so the next step here would be to conduct a poll to assess voter support for such a fee. I should note that we don't currently have funding for such a poll, so that would need to be secured before we could move forward. But on the slide here, I show the types of projects or expenditures that could be funded under this type of a fee. So it could be used to fund transportation services and improvements that would mitigate the impacts of motor vehicles on air and water quality. Not more than 5% of that fee could be used for administrative costs. And then just a kind of a point in time in terms of SCTA did pursue this type of measure back in 2010. It lost 57% to 43%. And also with the passage of Proposition 26, any new vehicle registration fee would require a 2/3 vote to pass. So that kind of higher threshold that really makes it challenging for us when we're talking about any type of new tax. And we listed this on the previous slide, but just to bring it up here as well. We estimate this would bring in or could bring in about $5 million per year in revenue. So less than a sales tax, but certainly would be money that could be well spent towards bike and ped and transit types of projects. And then the other next steps that the climate ad hoc identified were to evaluate the feasibility and restrictions of using a transient occupancy or transfer tax to raise revenue for climate. We think these options would most likely need to be pursued jurisdiction by jurisdiction rather than countywide by RCPA. But we do plan to do further research into these options and to be able to bring that information back to the climate ad hoc on the board. Explore collaboration opportunities, as I mentioned, with our two partner agencies. And then, of course, continue tracking the grants, other funding opportunities, and the advocacy with the climate bond. And we do have our legislative services RFP that we're working on. And once we get that support on board, that will really help us with the climate bond advocacy. So with that, I will turn it back over to the chair for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I do want to mention that actually the Board of Supervisors met this morning for a climate workshop. And I did bring up the idea of sort of funding a poll. It wasn't agendized, so it wasn't something that we could sort of decide on. My colleagues who are not present, my colleagues who are present obviously can speak for themselves. Supervisor Gore expressed support. Supervisor Gorin expressed the desire for more information. And so I think we'd probably appreciate outreach since she does not serve on this board. And then I have other two colleagues present in person. So I know that you have to leave in about 5 minutes. So rather than go to public comment, I don't know if there's anything that you want to sort of ask or state about this, just knowing your time schedule.
I'm interested in the idea of combining this with a renewal of ag and open space or public works measures. Wondering how that would work. Wondering what, switching over to the polling side, wondering what we're asking in the polling side. Is it about a measure that would be, say, the ag and open space plus climate measures? Is that the kind of polling we're looking at, or are we looking at the range of options that we did before and didn't find a whole lot of enthusiasm for? What's the intent there?
So I would say that's up to the will of the board. But what was sort of discussed at the ad hoc was looking at things that we hadn't looked at before, because what we looked at before didn't work. And so that's why we were interested in either the idea of tax someone who is not the person who is voting, right? Like a, sort of TOT or a luxury tax, or something that feels de minimis, like a vehicle license fee, or looking at, some kind of a combined measure or initiative. But that's ultimately sort of what we want to hear from everyone today in person about if there's interest.
Vehicle license fee, it seems like a really tough one to find, especially with the 2/3. We couldn't even get 50% in 2010. And then the TOT, did we pull on that before? I know we talked about it before, and that it's jurisdiction by jurisdiction, essentially.
Yeah, one thing that came up, and I don't know if Corey O'Donnell wants to share with the board, was discussing the legislation that was passed, introduced by Senator Dodd with respect to the climate resilience districts and some ambiguity of the language that we could potentially, the other thing is, if there are tools that we don't have in our toolkit, we know some folks up at the state, and we could always advocate legislatively for, a means for us to actually go out and get those funds. And so we talked a little bit, actually in the ad hoc committee about, would it be a 1-2 where you find out what people are willing to pay for, and then you try to seek the authority for those kinds of initiatives. But Corey.
Sure. Is this? Yep, it's still on. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Corey O'Donnell, RCPA SCTA Council. Thank you for the question. I think there's opportunity with the existing legislation to potentially either seek an opinion from Ledge Council on some clarity on the kind of vagueness, which is both a blessing and a curse sometimes in legislative language, to get some clarity there on the potential for doing something countywide with TOT, as has already been indicated by Tanya. Right now, the way that TOT works is they would have to be done to have anything countywide. It would have to be done by each jurisdiction. The cities have their own. A county TOT can only apply in the unincorporated county under the existing law. So the question is whether a climate resilience district, as RCPA is now under Dodd's legislation from last year, could potentially have countywide jurisdiction on a TOT. So that would either need some clarity from Ledge Council or some legislative clarity, in which case we could potentially run a tweak on a bill as opposed to starting from scratch on something. But these are things that we have just started talking about and would potentially want to reach out to the delegation in Sacramento and explore options there if that was the desire of the board to go that direction.
Any follow-up, Director Corsi, since I know your time is very limited?
Just, I would be interested if we could do a countywide TOT thing. I think trying to do it jurisdiction by jurisdiction
Great.
is very tough. If we're doing in concert with Ag and Open Space and Parks, I'm wondering, about how we fund a pool that way and, what all it entails, but definitely willing to keep exploring this.
Great, thank you so
I'm
much.
sorry, I gotta go.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around as long as you could. Any other comments or questions from my colleagues? Director Bagby?
Yeah, Tanya or Corey or James, whoever wants to take this. I was under the assumption, and maybe incorrectly so, that part of our Measure DD money that was earmarked for staff that you just teased out. I was, because so much of the staffing bandwidth that we need at the cities are things like small cities. I don't want to speak for Sebastopol specifically, but things like charging stations, VMT work, all those sorts of things. I was assuming that we would be able to use some of that money to fund that work through RCPA. Is that not the case, or is there a potential for some of the new for the Go Sonoma money to be able to go to staff work that would pick up the slack, that RCPA would be picking up the slack from the cities on? Does that, am I making sense? Does that make sense?
So with regard to the Go Sonoma measure, anything that is transportation related is eligible.
Mhm.
And, as of the ideas that Tanya shared moving forward, those transportation items are eligible for, the Go Sonoma funding dollars. So there is, and you'll notice that some of the things that Tanya is calling.
Tanya and Shauna, that's got to just be that's a brain teaser right there.
Some of the things that Tanya's calling out, they're directly being worked on by SCTA staff right now,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
like say that VMT, right? That's a grant that doesn't have any Go Sonoma dollars associated with it, but it could potentially be part of a move traffic and improve safety, a project that implements things underneath that, right? It could also be partly implemented by our TDM plan, right? That has, 3% of the sales tax measure set aside for SCTA staff. So the further integration of SCTA and RCPA, where anything transportation related that RCPA does is on the table. Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that sort of clarifies it. And also just kind of back to Senator Dodd's bill, I repeatedly asked that question, what does this mean? And everybody goes, we don't know. And they're saying that at Cal Cities. And I think that everyone is kind of looking at jurisdictions to maybe stick their necks out a little bit and maybe do some of the legwork. And I'd be willing to volunteer us, because I think it's, since we are the first RCPA in the state, it's kind of makes sense for us to take the lead on how we figure out how we do fund this. And and while I thank you for giving Director Corsi his time, because his time was limited, and I know there's probably support for TOT. I think that's going to be a difficult sell at some of the smaller cities, because that's something that we traditionally depend on to fund some of our local programs. And I think I would just right now, with the information that I have, I'd be more interested in pursuing a partnership with Parks or Ag and Open Space, because they are, they could potentially go out for a renewal. And I think that there are so many projects and goals that we have in common. I think that's a strong story to tell to the voters of Sonoma County. So you just with the information I have right now, I think that seems the most feasible thing to support.
Thank you, Director Bagby. Other comments or questions from Director Hinton? Sorry, Director Javier, after.
I don't know, is this?
You're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just want to reiterate, small cities and Here's we're in the news a lot. Financing is always a challenge and TOT is something that we need to keep a hold of. For our cities, and having served on ag and open space for a number of years, that makes the most sense to me too. It seems like that's makes a lot of sense. So that would be the way I'd like to see the direction going, for sure.
Director Harvey?
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues on the TOT, and unless we could do something countywide. I mean, I can't even imagine having it to run 10 campaigns and, you know, how complicated that get, and what if, you know, 8 cities pass and 2 don't, then are they, it just seems like it's a very complicated situation. So anything that we do, it seems like we need to do something that's countywide. Otherwise, I think we will be asking for trouble.
Well, I would agree with my other colleagues, because I do believe that ag and open space, those I think the voters would be more apt to support that. And to put this in makes a lot more sense, and TOT is very valuable for every city for specific projects that we can't fund.
Other comments? All right, let's hear from members of the public. If anyone is present or on Zoom wishing to speak on this item.
I currently do not see any members of the public with their hands up on this item.
Great, thank you. So in conclusion, in terms of sort of direction, because I feel like it's really important to be, you know, clear on this one. You know, do we want to ask the county to fund a poll to explore what potentially a joint measure with ag and open space would look like? Do we want to potentially explore the countywide sort of TOT or a countywide luxury tax, both of which would require some kind of clarification and potential action from state law? Do we want to just sort of see what the voters think about it so that we can then kind of deliberate over all of the options? Where is everyone headed? Because I want to make sure we have sort of some clear direction in terms of what we're asking of the county that we can take back to the county, but also so that Tanya and Corey can follow up.
Okay.
I'm okay. And then
Ag and
Dr.
open space. I mean, going to the state just seems like the long haul. Ag and open space is right here, and it does seem to make sense, I think, to pitch something jointly to the voters versus get involved with the luxury tax or the TOT idea. That's my opinion.
Director Kelly?
Yeah, I think, you know, I sit on the Ag and Open Space Fiscal Oversight Commission, so I know, you know, in looking at what are the funding priorities for Ag and Open Space, what are their concerns about the cost to maintain the conservation easements and the work that they've already done historically since it first passed, you know, not even thinking about going forward. I think while that we have a lot of synergies and with some of these specific issues, we are in line, like we align with their priorities. I think my concern would be the ongoing funding that they need to just continue to operate and do what they're doing. I don't know if how much interest or support there would be long-term for some of their quarter-cent sales tax money to go to fund programs outside of what's already under that umbrella, because a lot of the climate mitigation adaptation work that they're already doing is like specific to certain properties that are identified within the Vital Lands Initiative, which is like the guiding document around which properties they want to, you know, conserve. So, and then all the agricultural preservation work, which I think there's some carbon sequestration synergies, but it's different than some of the stuff that we're talking about. And so, I think as it relates to polling, and I think to your question about where do we go from here and how do we ask voters what they'd be amenable to in the future, I do think it'd be really helpful to have some polling done, and if the county can lead on that, I think it'd be helpful, because it is going to be a tricky sell to voters around how do these two agencies come together. We have common goals, but I think ag and open space, especially around ag, I think some folks don't necessarily understand voters might not understand the connection between what we are trying to do with RCPA and what the mission of ag and open space is. So I think asking and doing the polling will be helpful in understanding, where people would want to see it go. Healdsburg is a city that is not a part of the county's TOT. We have decided to do our own thing with respect to like how we market ourselves and how, the destination funding. And I think Sonoma Valley as well might be on their own. I know Sandra's not here today, but I think those are the two geographies within, I'm seeing some nods, the two geographies within the county that have decided we are not going to pool with TOT. And so I can't imagine, and it is the sole funding source of our community services department in the city. So I think that would be a tough sell in Healdsburg. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I would caution us against trying to do anything that isn't just one campaign that's the umbrella for the reasons that others have shared. And so I think the county helping us identify what is the right vehicle through potentially doing polling to look at it would be helpful. And of course, agree that asking low-income residents who are paying a disproportionate share of sales tax is always difficult because they're the most impacted by the negative impacts of climate change. So I struggle with thinking that sales tax is the right vehicle, to begin with, but I don't think TOT is either in this context.
Great, thanks. Director Bradby.
Yeah, I don't know if it's too early to suggest possibly an ad hoc. I know that Tanya has talked with the heads of the other agencies, but I feel like I need some more information at this point and maybe a little more financial analysis of the pros and cons of either sales tax renewal with our agency partners, and then I'd like to see that compared to some of the other options that have been brought up. So just wondering if anybody has an idea of that best next steps in giving specific direction to staff. But I would be open to getting some additional information back first before we give definitive direction.
Director Abbott.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. I think what's true is that, the big picture, right? We're looking for a pot of money to staff and do projects within RCPA. We have to identify what it is we're asking voters to fund and the projects going forward. I understand that no one wants to share TOT, and I would doubt the county wants to share TOT either, honestly. I appreciate Director Kelly talking about the ag and open space, because the same thing is true there. A quarter cent there. I mean, do they have an eighth cent to give up on that? I doubt it. Without some some big impact. And regional parks just the same, as I'm sure it is true of those cities here that have their own sales tax. Because we could all put something on the table and be in it together, since we are a regional entity, instead of having it come out of one sales tax that's countywide. So I think we should, as I mentioned in our executive committee, every city, I don't know what every city invests in climate leads or point persons or programs. The county, this morning, we had a very lengthy, and they're time limited. So it's not over the long course of full-time employees, but the original intent of RCPA was supposed to be that regional plan, and to have one lead agency be able then to give that information to each individual jurisdiction. I think we need to truly, if that's what we're trying to finance, get back to that model and then contribute accordingly for what we get in return, honestly. And I think that's the business model that I think the public would be looking for. And then I know we talked about it briefly, the polling that took place that we were exposed to on Friday at MTC. While I love polling and data, we have done 3 polls this last year, none of which show an appetite for much of anything. And I think that you could spend $30,000 doing a poll, and I love Ruth Birdstein. She does great work, but I think I know the poll that we would get back, and it's not successful. You can ask all sorts of different questions. And we talked about the idea of pooling money annually on a poll for any questions. And it becomes difficult because I know that can't do a poll that's that long, but to do trends and to try to find out what the appetite of the public is, I think is an important thing. But at the same time, I hate throwing good money after bad, knowing that I have no confidence that the poll is going to show anything different, especially as it's phrased now, because it's really just, we need a pot of money to finance something that we don't have the money for. Public doesn't think that you don't have the money for it, honestly.
Director Peter
Just
Thompson.
throw in my 2 cents. I'm really concerned because, we have a fire tax coming and we're already at 9.5%. And that means Petaluma will be at 10%. And that is a hefty tax, to ask for more taxes. And I'm not sure if right now, I do agree that there is not the appetite for more sales tax or just taxes in general. And I don't know, I think that's just kind of the mood in the federal, level. I mean, it's just all trickling down. And maybe it would be better to look at this after 2024, November, and see what happens.
Director Bagby.
That's kind of why I'd like to see a comparison. I think that there's synergy with what RCPA and Ag and Open Space and Parks are trying to accomplish. And the question is within the current sales tax level, is there any room? And I need more information on that. I also am very interested in comparing it to the luxury real estate tax, because that's something that is within our control to do locally. So I just feel like I need some additional information on what the viability of kind of I'm hearing 2 possibilities right now, or maybe possibly 3 that are under local control. And that's why I would just like to get us some additional information back before I would really want to make a decision on what I want to support moving forward.
So follow up on that, would it be helpful to have sort of a matrix? And I think that also Corey might have the answers to some of those questions. Because for instance, we actually can't do sort of a luxury home tax right now, right?
Right.
Across jurisdictions. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to see it like as a table of like pros and cons and possibilities. But I want to get some more information back again from like Ag and Open Space and Parks, as if there were a renewals, how much room is there in the current sales tax that they are collecting. And I think I know what the answer to that is going to be. And so this is a tough decision to make. And I just would I want to be very clear on what the challenges are and what the benefits are going forward.
Corey, do you have anything to add or?
Sure, I could just add on the luxury tax option that Tanya had identified that came up as a question from the ad hoc. Under California law, only charter cities are who have kind of that unique special power to tax at that in that way. So that would not be available on a countywide basis or to many of the jurisdictions, including the county itself. I think there's, to your question and getting more information, I think absolutely there's always an opportunity for us to roll up our sleeves and get some, think outside the box still more, and do some of the additional legal research in terms of whether there's space on those other measures. I think that you're right. Currently, is there space? No, there's an expenditure plan that says what that money is used for. That's been approved by the voters, but are there some Venn diagram overlaps on some of the work that we all want to be doing countywide on land, water, and bike ped and things like that can fit within those things and also meet some of what your board is looking at here today under both active transportation and for RCPA? I think the answer is yes. And then it's sort of like, how do we all kind of frame that up looking ahead to when those measures are going to go back out to the voters to kind of get the biggest win-wins and, stack on, the monies as we can for these programs and projects and the staff to make it all work. So I think we just need to keep talking, and I take direction from the chair on how you want to bring this back maybe to the climate funding ad hoc to work on a little bit more and maybe have further conversations in Sacramento as the climate bond stuff starts moving forward. That could be a really big opportunity.
Director Krupke and then Director Peter Thompson.
As the only one who hasn't chimed in yet, I'll just say that I agree with everybody here for in a sequence, right? So I think that we need to explore our opportunities and get more information. I agree with Director Rabbit that I think I also know where the polling is going to go. And I also agree with Director Cater Thompson that we might have to look past 2024 We do have there is going to be a fire tax on the ballot, but I think this county is also going to have 3 housing bonds on the ballot, as well as childcare and other things. So it's going to be crowded in terms of bonds and taxes on, in November 2024. And just adding another one to that is just not going to, I think the shrewd people are going to pick and choose, and then there's going to be people who's like, nope to everything, because they're going to see it in bulk. So I think that more information and looking past 2024 is probably what I would lean towards.
Great. Director Kater Thompson.
When is the Parks bond and the Ag and Open Space up?
Yeah. So Ag and Open Space expires in March of 2031, and the Regional Parks expires in March of 2029. So it's out of ways.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
So is everyone sort of comfortable with sending this back to the ad hoc committee with this conversation fresh in our minds to consider potentially a longer timeline to kind of look at the different options to track the progress of climate bonds and also to kind of develop a matrix of kind of like what are the authorities we have, what are the authorities we don't have, what are the authorities we might want to have, and and then also potentially to, I don't know if it would be worth even following up with Ledge Council to say, hey, what do these words mean in this piece of state legislation, so that perhaps we can get clarity on what powers we either already do have, questionably do have, or might be able to achieve with a clarification from the state.
I think you nailed it, acting chair, because I think that the two near-term questions for me are how will the Dodd bill shake out as other jurisdictions try to fund it? And then the other piece is, I think I've lost it now. So I'll tell you later. But there were two things that were really near term that I want the more information on. And you you nailed it in your summary. So if we can keep the ad hoc on for a little bit longer and get some answers to that, I think that would be great.
Great. And as the fake chair, I can't sort of appoint anybody, but I believe that we actually have room for one more member on that ad hoc committee. Is that correct? And so perhaps if anyone is particularly keenly interested in leaning in on that work, it could be passed on to the real chair for possible action. Anybody? Because currently it is myself, it's Director Kelly, Director Rogers, Director Giudice, and I see a Rochambeau happening. Who's gonna?
I think I'd be very happy with Melanie. If she, she seems, you've stated that you would like to do that, and I think it's great.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. And I think that actually as chair of the Sonoma County Legislative Committee, I could kind of help out with pushing the question regarding the Dodd bill and getting some further definition at the state level for us. And the answer to that may be, we have to take a lead on determining what those funding sources mean. And I'm happy to work on that.
Great. I will take that back to the real chair for potential action.
Just quickly, will you be talking like each jurisdiction, like our Parks Department, like the city of Petaluma? Would you talk to the Parks Department to see how, the parks measure and how it actually fits in with the RCPA?
We hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's a good,
and
I'm sure the regional parks, as they're doing their planning for that they would also be reaching out, I would imagine. But certainly in the near term, as we're looking at some of these opportunities for additional funding, like in the urban forest planning and implementation, we definitely would be working with local parks department.
Yeah, because I'm just kind of curious what other cities are doing, and we're kind of, because I'm seeing some crossovers, especially with parks. With the city, ag also, but for some reason I think parks.
Yeah.
I just remember, but the second one was with that, and it's that there's nothing stopping ag and open space and parks from going out early if they find a compelling reason to do so. And but I think that you bring up a very good point, is that in Cloverdale we have Measure M money going to both parks and fire safety and resiliency, and so there is an appetite for finding additional funding to help us maintain our open spaces and do all of the other things around safety and resiliency and extreme weather event preparation and using our open space lands to do that. So I think going back to the cities and finding out about how the cities are using their Measure M funding, their ag and open space funding to pursue their climate goals is an important part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that both ag and open space and regional parks will be going out relatively early so that, you know, because, and to Director Kelly's point before that she raised, like, for instance, if ag and open space were not to be renewed, they would have to stop spending money and start putting it all into sort of an endowment fund for future, you know, kind of stewardship and enforcement needs. So that would definitely change how business is being done currently if those measures were not to be reauthorized. So better to find that out early and have also another opportunity, right, than to go late. Any other final comments for the good of the order? All right, we will take that back to the ad hoc. Oh, and Drew, did I do public comment on this one? I can't. Okay, great. Just want to make sure that we checked that box. And I think that, thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you.
I think that
Yeah,
was
great
it from
discussion.
you. Really,
Yeah,
really
very helpful.
appreciate all of the excellent information and look forward to the next steps. So.
Definitely. Thank you.
And with that, we will be moving on to the Countywide Equitable Building Electrification Action Plan, and BC will be presenting that.
Here, let's see, are we all set? Wonderful, thank you, Ross. Good afternoon, Chair Hopkins and members of the board. My name is BC Capps, Climate Change Program Specialist. Here to present today about a proposed action plan that we'll be working on over the course of the next year. And following up on the conversation that was just had, I wanted to point out this is a countywide planning effort in which we are taking our lead from the work that's currently being done by the jurisdictions, looking at the needs that we're hearing from the jurisdictions, and then attempting to put those together into a longer term action plan that will provide benefits back and hopefully be usable by staff at each of the jurisdictions. So with that, let's see, here's my clicker. There we go. Our presentation today, I'm presenting on our proposal to produce a countywide equitable building electrification action plan. I'm going to be working on the name of that, looking for a clever acronym. So that may change over the course of the upcoming months. And so the presentation today, wanting to provide a little bit of background on the plan, talk about some of the key elements of this action plan, and then talk about our next steps. So some of the purposes of this action plan that we have in mind is being really tiered off of our adopted climate mobilization strategy that was adopted by this board in 2021. And we are really looking to build upon that strategy and dig in deeper on building electrification, and really looking to produce, develop kind of three major aspects of the report. One is defining a roadmap to improve energy efficiency and electrification of residential and commercial properties throughout all of Sonoma County. We also want to outline potential policy options that this board and other local jurisdictions can take to move that work forward. And we also want to deeply embed a public engagement and community engagement aspect to this, and really looking at social equity considerations as part of this plan. So those are our three overarching kind of purposes of the work. As I mentioned, this is being tiered off of our Sonoma County mobilization strategy that was adopted in 2021. That strategy identifies 13 major kind of mobilization strategies across 4 initiative areas. And as you can see here, I have them all listed, but we're really focusing in on topic 1A here, decarbonization of building energy. There's work happening on all of these other aspects of this of the mobilization strategy, but for the presentation today, really focusing on building energy. And I guess I should point out there, number 4 on the strategies of the major initiative areas in the mobilization strategy is the equity and community engagement portion that is going to be a major aspect of this report as well. So looking at the existing language in our climate mobilization strategy, and the first strategy in that is really the all electric buildings campaign, which is really looking to accelerate the electrification of existing buildings and to electrify all new buildings. And so there's three things that are identified in that document. The first is developing a retrofit requirement for existing buildings. The second in letter B is requiring new buildings to be all electric. And the third item is focusing in on the racial, social, and environmental equity of the building electrification plans that have been or that may be adopted coming out of this work. To dig in just a little bit on this issue of social equity and the way it plays in as part of this plan, there's a lot of the work around building decarbonization. It's really focused first and foremost within RCPA having to do with greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And it's about the climate, it's about saving the environment, protecting the environment. And what's sometimes often lost is the human element of it. And there are aspects of it where the good work that we do oftentimes has additional consequences or things that need to be where there are multiple competing aspects at hand. And so one of the things there is looking at lower income and disadvantaged households, wanting to make sure that as we're doing this work, that acknowledging that there are households that are unable to afford the upfront cost of this work that will be proposed, even when they're offered incentives and lower long-term utility bills. The households may just not have the upfront capital. There also may be aspects where renters are renting from a landlord and they can't get approval from the landlord to do some upgrade work they want to do. They have the right intents, they want to do the right thing, but they can't get their approval. Sometimes they may get approval from a landlord to do the work, and then they find out a few months later that their rents are being raised. And so therefore they have kind of had the right intent. The building owner has acquiesced, but then they get priced out of the unit. And then also kind of a final example here is a lot of times just in the larger realm of whole neighborhoods that may have upgrades done to them. And that may have the unintended consequence of kind of environmental gentrification and pushing out longer term households, longer term residents. So those are just things that we are going to be very cognizant of as we produce this plan. In the staff report that was a part of the board packet, I wanted to call out, we've identified a number of documents from organizations that we're using as a guide around this area. First, our own SCTA RCPA equity statement that was adopted a few months ago, work from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, Greenlining Institute, Emerald Cities Collaborative, and the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy have all produced fantastic work the last couple of years, kind of around this issue of social equity, environmental justice, and building electrification. So we are really using that kind of as foundation to build on top of. The other key foundation that we're using in this work is we are, of course, in close collaboration with all the jurisdictions throughout the county, as well as the county itself. And there have been a number of climate action plans, climate action frameworks, greenhouse gas reduction strategies. Each and every jurisdiction has some guidance documents that have either been produced or that they're using as a guide to kind of guide their sustainability work. And so we're in the process here of have collected all of those and basically putting them together into a large a large matrix where we can really pull out and say, hey, for each jurisdiction, what are the priorities? Have those city councils or the board of supervisors kind of adopted to bring forward? And so we really are starting our work with the jurisdictions with starting kind of what are these adopted plans? And as a few examples, these are just pulled from some of the plans. to show you kind of what are some of the items that are being kind of within those, talking about strategies to adopt all electric reach codes for residential and commercial buildings, talking about decarbonizing non-residential buildings and municipal buildings, as well as residential buildings, reducing energy consumed by municipal facilities, supporting low-income residents and renters who face barriers, incentivizing both property owners and renters to retrofit multi-family housing. So these are some of the examples of what's in the adopted plans from the jurisdictions, and that we're kind of pulling together in addition to the work that's been already done by RCPA kind of into this kind of much larger action plan. So much of the work around this and that we do here with RCPA is guided by our greenhouse gas inventory that we accomplish every 2 years. We are going to be starting on our next greenhouse gas inventory, looking at 2022 data. We'll be doing that soon. But you may remember that I presented here about a year ago about our 2020 totals. And so over the course of 1990 to 2020, the county was successfully able to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 23%. In the building sector, that was an amazing 49% reduction, something to be very, very proud of, I think, for all the jurisdictions in the county and staff here at RCPA. Very fantastic number to see that come down. But I want to acknowledge that that number, kind of the decrease in emissions having to do with building emissions, we think is really responsible. A huge part of it comes from the incorporation of Sonoma Clean Power and their service, which started in 2014, much cleaner energy that's available now. And they are currently producing or provide approximately 78% of the buildings or the county's electricity use. That's countywide electricity use. And so we kind of taking from those reductions that have happened, we're really looking at 3 next steps. One is we need to increase building energy efficiency. That's continue to bring down the amount of energy we use. We need to transition and move from natural gas to electricity. And then we need to continue the transition to zero emission electricity to meet those local needs. That transition to zero emission electricity is something that really Sonoma Clean Power and others are working on very closely, very carefully, and very diligently. And it's these first 2 items around energy efficiency and the conversion of natural gas to electric equipment that is really kind of our focus here as part of this action plan. Don't want to spend too much time on these next 2 slides, but wanted to show very briefly just a couple of the stats that have started to pull together with looking at numbers, kind of numbers of units. How many, we talk about electrifying all residential units across the county. How many is that? So a really rough count here, kind of zeroing in on that last column there of total units in the county, somewhere over 62,000 units. The majority of that in single family units and a much smaller number is multifamily. The other key thing to take from this slide is not just in the total units, but also in the first column is to look at the large proportion of those total units that were actually built before 1978. And so that shows the older the building, probably the less stringent the California Energy Code would have been at the time, and the less energy efficient the older buildings are. So that gives us a guide, I think, even with thinking about how to approach these large number of units. The newer units are going to need a different set of kind of improvements than some of the older units. On some of those older ones, the work will need to go deeper. Also looking really quickly here at energy use by fuel type, and the key distinction here is looking between the row for electricity and natural gas, and looking at the fact that approximately residential buildings in general use a higher percentage of natural gas than commercial buildings. But they both building types still use a fair amount of natural gas, and so part of this work is really to move the natural gas usage to electricity use as much as possible, and then to bring down those usage numbers over time using through energy efficiency and other, say, demand response programs. So thinking about the actual plan that we are planning to produce, we are kind of, here's several key elements of the plan. We're looking to do an analysis of the existing building stock, some much deeper analysis than just those first couple of those tables and numbers I showed there. There's being work proposal right now from the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, who is going to be doing a Bay Area 9-county-wide building stock analysis. And so we will be participating in that and digging deep into that information to understand more about all the homes, buildings, both residential and non-residential, that are here in the county. We're also going to be developing a community engagement and equity framework, really is bringing in those aspects I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then we want to split this work into kind of two subcomponents, I guess, two parts. Because of the types of buildings, there's a different set of things that are needed for existing buildings versus new construction. And so that is really kind of a big distinction there, that on the existing buildings, we're thinking about reach codes that could be developed to encourage retrofits. We're talking about what are those retrofit options? What are the incentives that are available? How about financing or workforce development that could be incorporated into some of those actions? And then on the new construction work, that's really much more focused on all electric reach codes and design assistance that could be put in place as those buildings are being designed. And so this work we expect will play out over 2024 and 2025. I'll be working on some more detailed timelines very shortly, but in general, in the course of next year for 2024, we really are hoping to focus on the existing buildings aspect of this work and really try to align the steps that are needed here in the county to really be able to leverage and be prepared for the incoming Inflation Reduction Act funding that's coming down from the federal government, will be passed to the state and then be distributed out through some sort of local programs that have not yet been defined. To do this work in 2024, we expect to looking to form an existing buildings working group to coordinate input from our local jurisdictions and our agencies and to develop that engagement plan. I want to mention right here, kind of key partners in this work right at the front is the county's Climate Action and Resiliency Division, Sonoma Clean Power, and the 2 air quality management districts that operate here in the county. We'll be working very closely with all of those organizations and as well as a number of others on this work. And then the second part of this work for 2025 to stage a little bit later will be focused on the new construction aspect of this and looking at the building code cycle. Every 3 years, California adopts a new building code, and there's the opportunities if jurisdictions would like to adopt additional reach codes. Those can be adopted at any time during the cycle, but it's most common to be done at the kind of cycle start. That would be a December 31st, 2025 deadline. And that would at least be to attempt to work through 2025 to understand where are each of the jurisdictions, what do they have in mind, and is there the ability to make things as consistent as possible between the different ordinances that may be under consideration. One other reason to pause a little bit on that reach code work right now is that there's a current lawsuit that's been filed against the city of Berkeley, which is currently in the U.S. Federal Court of Appeals in the 9th District. And I think there's a lot of eyes that are very much watching that court case because it will have some implications as to how future reach codes may need to be constructed. So we'll be aligning that work. So that's kind of in general, thinking about 2024, 2025. That is all that I had for part of my presentation. I'm very interested to get any initial input or feedback. Otherwise, this is just a report for you today to let you know what we're taking on. And then I'll be back in a few months to provide some kind of an additional information and updates as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much, BC, and thank you so much for your collaboration and inclusion of other agencies that are also working on similar initiatives. I think that's so critical to getting things done. I'm going to go to the clerk and see if there are any members of the public who wish to comment on this item, either in person or via Zoom. Seeing no one in person.
We do have one member of the public on Zoom, and that is Rick Lutman. Rick, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Drew, and thank you, BC, for your report. On your last slide, number 13, where you talked about in 2024, you're going to go after existing buildings. In 2025, you're going to do new constructions. It seems to me that's exactly backwards, because by 2025, you will have another whole year's worth of existing buildings. When you have a leak in your plumbing, the first thing you do is to stop the leak before you stop mopping up. I wonder if you could comment.
Then next we have Zeno Swink. My apologies, Zeno. I permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's satisfying in Sebastopol. I had a question about EV charging. EV adoption is critically dependent on at-home charging, and I wonder whether building electrification includes maybe a reach code around that issue, or the remodeling of houses, the panel size, that kind of thing. Is there a connection between the transportation element and the building element?
Thank you, Zena. I don't see any other members of the public with their hands up.
Thank you so much. BC, would you want to respond to those comments? Thanks.
Of course. First, on the comment around existing buildings versus new construction, I think the reason why I have proposed to focus on existing buildings first is really thinking about there's three reasons that come to my mind immediately. One, there's a number of, there's a fair amount of momentum already in this direction, especially among our program partners that we are working with that I mentioned. The second is we really want to align so that as the programs become available through the Inflation Reduction Act and become kind of dispersed at the state level, that Sonoma County is in the best place possible for our residents and our building owners to take place in those. And the third aspect is having to do with the new construction. My personal opinion is that, or my observation has been, that the current case against the city of Berkeley has had a chilling effect on conversations at the local government level. And with limited exceptions, I have not found our local jurisdictions excited about engaging on new construction electric reach codes at this point. And that there's a lot of trepidation and waiting at least until there's an initial next ruling in the city of Berkeley. There are a number of folks working at the state and federal or state and regional level, kind of with alternative plans, depending upon what those court case may find out. But at this point, I think for those reasons, I had prioritized kind of the existing buildings over the new construction in the short term. And then on the second point around EV adoption, that is a fantastic observation. And yes, I wanted to confirm, I did not mention it. I think it's an oversight on my part, but I truly do see the role of EV charging and battery storage as being part of this conversation. And that became very evident in our, over the course of last year, our climate protection initiative campaigns. It was actually not the transportation subcommittee that leaned into the electric vehicles. It was actually our building committee who was actually thinking buildings, home chargers, battery systems, and thinking about it all as kind of a one connected system. So I will certainly be including work on the EV adoption as part of that work. So.
Thank you so much, BC, for that answer. Bringing it back to my colleagues. Did I see Director Cater Thompson leaning in?
Sure. Well, we've actually approved 2 projects with full electrification. And the second project, EVs were included, in the project. So far, we haven't had any trouble with developers. But my big concern is, electrifying older homes, because I have kids and we talk about this all the time. And it's, and also I'm really concerned about the emissions that are killing people in their homes because of old gas stoves. But, you're talking, 220, you have to change, do you have to change your electrical panel? I mean, there's just so much involved in it. And it's very expensive. And I think there has to be a means to really help people financially, and you don't have to be at the lowest income not to be able to afford this, is, what I'm finding. And so I think it's kind of across the board, but I think for equity, especially when people are renting, making sure, even a program, how do we find out how many stoves are out there that need to be replaced? I mean, what is that process? And I'm very interested in this and would like to, looking forward to more information.
Thank you so much, Director Harvey.
Yes, you talk in the report that you've worked with lots of different agencies and things, and I was wondering if you could share a little bit if you've worked with PG&E, because I'm not sure. I want to be sure that PG&E is on board with all of this, since we have to get our electricity ultimately delivered from them. And I want to be sure that their grid infrastructure is where it needs to be, whether there are plans for investments. I see them tearing up a lot of streets and replacing pipes for natural gas and things like that. So I want to be sure that their investments and their plans for their staff and everything are consistent with what we're doing. And the reason that I bring this up is we've had a few instances where we had a whole section of businesses that waited 1.5 years for PG&E to come out to work on their panel. I had people in our neighborhood that waited 8 months for PG&E to come out to get their solar set up to get work. So I just want to be sure that, we're putting these things out there, but if the infrastructure to make it all happen isn't there, we could end up with people not very happy because they have nothing. So I just want to make sure that we're aligned.
Director Rabbit.
Someone, and you mentioned that how often they change the building code. And I was thinking, well, as an architect, licensed architect, I think I've seen 12 building code iterations. And James, when I was first licensed, the building code was 1 volume about yay big. And now it's about 3 volumes about yay big. And nothing ever gets easier and nothing ever gets cheaper. It doesn't always get better. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't always get better. And I have a real hard time with reach code. And I have a real hard time with people applying the term reach code. California's building code is a reach code because the rest of the country uses the uniform building code. California steps it up for a variety of different reasons, including Title 24, which is the energy regulations, the first in the nation to do that years and years ago. And I remember years and years ago, Title 24 told you use as much gas as possible, not electric. And now it's completely flipped. And through all this, it's funny that we don't necessarily talk about building conservation, using less energy overall. Just make sure you use the electrical energy, not the fossil fuel energy. So I still think that, especially given all the issues that PG&E has and being able to supply power, that the conservation using less energy overall is still the primary purpose going forward. But I also know that looking, and I to my colleague's point, if a developer or builder wants to only install electric, great, go for it. If you think that you're still marketing the buildings, great. I think on existing buildings, I think it's great to give rebates and incentives. I would not want to, and I don't think any city in this county, looking at the summary, has addressed existing buildings mandating any kind of change. And I don't know what that looks like. If it's like the ADA where you do, if you do an upgrade to your property, 20% of the equivalent cost of that project needs to go towards an upgrade, which is prioritized in certain ways. But all you're going to do is increase overall costs. So I think we really need to tread lightly on that personally. And then I would ask, in the big picture of things, as was evidenced by the number that Sonoma Clean Power really taking all the energy generation for lighting and having that be renewable for the most part through the implementation of Sonoma Clean Power was the biggest impact to building energy usage. And now we're going after, the kind of the harder hanging fruit to get to, which becomes more politically wrought and more expensive, and more difficult to really have what is the goal that we're trying to achieve here locally. So I think even on the reach codes, again, I don't like that word, but reach codes for the new construction how much are we moving the needle? Or are we just patting ourselves on the back for being, doing something positive? And I really think that we should look at things this way, especially in the midst of a housing crisis, and all the different housing affordability issues that we have that we're putting money after. For me, rebates, incentives, great. Having anything go above and beyond that, unless you're paying for it 100%, and then the infrastructure bill, who knows if it provides that kind of money? I don't think so. I would be really hesitant to move forward too far.
Director Bagby.
I have a very specific question, and I think it's answerable, but I think it kind of addresses Rick Lutman's question about 2024 priority versus 2025, and that is a couple of months ago I was able to attend a webinar which was absolutely fantastic with the Sonoma County Climate Action and Resiliency Division, specifically because, just as Janice brought up earlier, I live in an older home. We were able to put on a new roof and we put on solar panels, and our next step is hopefully battery installation. And we I think logically doing it in phases, because it's expensive for everybody unless you are a very, very lucky person or a lottery winner. And it goes to the many issues about how do I get started with electrification and using renewable energy, or how do I get to the next step on where I can go, which is what the webinar was kind of focused around. And the big question that they couldn't answer was when we would have a date on the IRA. And this was about 2 or 3 months ago that we attended this webinar, and they were like, it's going to be great when we know more about when funding will come down from the IRA, from the federal government to the states, and it gets distributed, and it's going to be great when we know how that money is going to be distributed. So I guess my simple question is, do we know any more than we did a couple of months ago, or do we know when we're going to know, so that we can start pushing this information out on, this is the funding that's available for solar, this is the funding that's available for batteries, this is the funding that's available for what you want to do to either your home or to your commercial business. If we don't know when we're going to know, do we know when we're going to know when we're going to know? And if you want to tell me at the next meeting, that's fine too. But I think that that's what influences that 2024 priorities versus 2025. At least that's what I've inferred.
I wish.
When do we know we're not, when,
I
can
do-
you say that one
I-
more time or 3 times fast or something? Like that? I'm like.
I do not have specific details on each of the different funding programs. I can pull those together. I do know that some of the very first programs are starting then at the state level, then are having RFPs that are coming out to basically initiate that program, of which then funding would be available at some future date, but still undetermined.
But we'll probably know the 2024 funding sometime in 2024. That's what I'm getting. And that's part of the frustration a lot of people are having, is that we have this thing that we want to get going and we can't even, we know that there's going to be money for it, but we don't even know when that's going to be yet.
I will see if I can pull together. I'm sure that there are summaries of this available that we can pull, and then I will work with our clerk to see if we can distribute that to the board, so you can get the info. Great.
Yeah, also will be interesting to see how it's distributed, right? Because like people don't even know, what website do I go to? How do I find out more? The state website's a nightmare, Fed's same, anyways. Director O'Krepke.
Thank you. As far as reach codes go, sorry. As far as reach codes go, Santa Rosa already has one, so I don't really have an opinion on that. But with existing buildings, I don't know if you can bring up the slide that had the housing numbers built over time on it.
You mean to cycle through?
Yeah, you want to drive.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I think, in theory, the electrification of existing housing sounds nice, but my biggest concern is looking before 1978, the number of housing built versus total units. You may know this, but I believe in 1978 before, there were no efficiency requirements at all for construction, were there? So I'm looking at these houses that are using air conditioners, heaters, whatever else, that have poor insulation, that have windows that are terrible, that aren't weatherproofed in any way, shape, or form, and are drafty and whatever else. And so for me, it's the using of energy period that drives my interest versus what kind of energy that is. So when it comes to existing housing, I'd lean our efforts more towards efficiency of housing versus what kind of energy they're using.
Very good point.
And to be clear, there were energy requirements. I think what Title 24 really kicked in big time were the lighting requirements and some of the other things. There was always insulation. My house is pre-78. It has ceiling insulation, wall insulation. That really wouldn't be any different than what we have today. It's the other things, that the lighting requirements and whatnot.
But I will say, not to make this about me, but as someone who lived in a house that was built in 1987 and then now lives in a house in the same place that was built in 2020, it's the energy use is very different.
Director Bagby.
Well, as someone who lives in a house that was built closer to 1878. And I think that you bring up a great point in that, and this is something that I wanted to get your input on, BC too, is that there is so much of, and about fire safety and rebuilding, is that there's that synergy between fire safety and resiliency and our energy efficiency. That is a huge concern in our, let's just say the entire state. And when you're talking about single pane windows versus double pane or triple pane windows, that's the difference between something being fire resistant and not fire resistant. And so I was wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about where that comes in, that kind of that synergy comes into this plan.
I think this is my personal opinion, and I think the what I've heard from those that I really trust is, when thinking about each individual house, is to think about it as a holistic whole system. Some of the pieces that may need to be upgraded are electrical or equipment, mechanical equipment that are going to have an end of life and can be equipment that can be upgraded. But all of those other aspects of energy efficiency, tightening up the house, more insulation, thinking about seismic upgrades, thinking about wildfire hardening, there is a huge, large swath of that that is not about electrification. I very much hope as part of this report that we'll be able to say there is this large nexus of suite of things that need to be done. And this report is going to focus in on these pieces that are having to do with decarbonization and electrification. A lot of the resources that are available that we will want to point people towards, or the funding is available for, there's funding that is available for the upgrade of the mechanical equipment, but also potentially financing that's available for those other aspects as well. So my hope is that with whatever public outreach materials that kind of come out of this, that it is that full kind of the whole home upgrade guide. And again, I need to kind of give props to the county's Climate Action and Resiliency Division. The home resilience guide that they have produced that they're using right now is, I think, one of the best guides that's available locally, where it certainly is focused on energy efficiency and decarbonization, but that's not the exclusivity of it. That it talks about these other things about things that can be done to the home, and especially, I haven't brought this in yet, but the health and comfort aspects of it. My own personal building upgrade of our house with air sealing, we did it for environmental quality or for environmental benefits. It's with the wildfires the last few years, that has been our major benefit from it. It's been a health and safety benefit. That's not the reason we did it. I think some of those things we can really pull out with trying to make that part of it is also making that both a logical and an emotional case for property owners to spend money and kind of thinking about that full suite of benefits. So thanks for calling that out.
Any last, Director Kato
Just
Thompson?
a quick comment. I appreciate you bringing up about earthquakes, because if your house falls down, the electrification isn't going to give us any, we're not going to need it. But I do think we need to be bold when we're talking about the future. What I'm saying all the time is I got one toe in the ground. It's really not about me anymore. We need to look at the next generations and the next generation, because we're not doing a great job and we need to do better. And so I kind of like the bold approach. But at the same time, make sure our house doesn't fall down because it's an urban earthquake.
Any last comments for the good of the order? Thank you so much for an informative and thought-provoking sort of presentation, and also for my colleagues for such excellent questions and points. It's definitely something we've been grappling a lot with at the Air District as we move forward with our zero NOx regulation, and recognizing that there are just disparate impacts on different communities. And for some very specific situations, it's actually very challenging to find a cost-effective alternative that is all electric. Some particular type of water heater that's limited distribution, but this one type that fits in this one kind of a thing turns out to be almost impossible to find a replacement for. So we're looking at, how do we move forward as aggressively and boldly as possible while still keeping that goal of equity in mind, and recognizing that we might not all live in an 1878 house, but I recently moved from a 19-teens to a 1930s. So I'm going up by a couple decades in my old farmhouse sort of life in Sonoma County. But yeah, those retrofits can be very, very challenging. So thank you so much for your excellent presentation. And that is just a report, so no action is necessary. And next up, I believe we have Dana, our Senior Transportation Planner, to talk a little bit about active transportation, and specifically our Sonoma and Marin Bike Share Pilot Program Agreement, which is exciting. Good entrance. I like that. I think we should all do that.
That's impressive.
Here we go.
Hi, everyone. If you could just put it right back, that'd be great.
Yeah, front and center.
I'm Dana Teray, and I'm joined today by Isabel with Drop Mobility, and we also have Amber Wesson on Zoom, who will be doing part of this presentation as well. So Isabel, you could go ahead and sit down if you want. We just wanted to bring the bike up here for you all to take a look at, and if there is time, either at the end of this presentation, Isabel would be happy to share some details about the bike with you. Otherwise, you can stick around after the meeting and take a look at it. So, all right, we could go ahead to the next slide.
Sure.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm just going to recap a little bit of background on the grant and program. Talk about our procurement process, and which is the topic or board decision today, is the agreement between SCTA and Drop Mobility for bike share program. The scope of work, and then we'll turn it over to Amber to talk more about the Drop Mobility company, and then turn it back over to you for questions and answers. So just to kind of recap the program, SCTA and the Transportation Authority of Marin jointly applied for and received a grant from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission for a bike share program in the amount of $826,000. The intention of the grant program was to implement and test bike share programs in more suburban environments. And our grant application focused on first and last mile connections to smart stations, which is why we're presenting a map of the smart stations, current and planned up here, and the vision for shared bicycles to be available throughout the corridor for passengers getting to and from stations. So SCTA and the Transportation Authority of Marin have joint oversight of the program, and SCTA elected to act as the contract administrator for the grant. And we have a cooperative agreement with TAM to jointly manage the program. So in early 2020, SCTA and TAM started working on development of a pilot program with another company. And when we were a few months out from launching the system, the company ceased operations in summer 2022. So during that time, SCTA and TAM formed a working group to coordinate the development of a system. And we worked with MTC, SMART, Golden Gate, Bridge Highway Transportation District, staff from Santa Rosa, Roanoke Park, Cotati, Petaluma, Novato, San Rafael, and Larkspur. We formed a working group with these entities and worked through a public survey and market demand analysis process for obtaining local permits. We worked on site planning and permit submittals, and all of those things will be carried forward into the development of a program with a new operator. So this last summer, I came to you all with a proposed request for proposals to secure a new program operator. And that request for proposals was released in June, and proposals were received in August. We convened a review panel made up of staff from SCTA, TAM, MTC, City of Santa Rosa, City of San Rafael, and SMART. And the panel reviewed and scored 4 proposals that were received and recommended interviewing 2 of those firms. We held those interviews in October, and the panel unanimously selected Drop Mobility as the top ranked company. We began contract negotiations with Drop in November and have before you a staff recommendation to enter into a contract with Drop Mobility. So the scope of work for the program includes all the elements that are necessary to develop and operate the system, including establishing a program operating team, a warehousing facilities, and a call center, developing the service area and parking hub planning, including equity priority community distribution requirements that are included in the grant. We are providing information on and encouraging the use of the previously vetted parking hubs from the last contract. This scope includes outreach, marketing, and public relations for the program, and pricing and membership options that include a pay-as-you-go option, monthly, annual memberships, as well as an equity membership program. So the company will provide and maintain hardware, equipment, software, the app, a website, and will be responsible for data reporting. The company will also be responsible for and provide staffing for system rebalancing and maintenance. And the pilot program includes 300 GPS equipped pedal electric assist e-bikes, such as the one right here. And so where the technology for checking out the bike is on the bike itself.
And the pilot includes a 2-year operating period. So some other details of the program. It's a roughly 6-month timeframe to get up and running. And so we're anticipating the launch in summer 2024. And the staff working group that I mentioned earlier with the various jurisdictions will help guide and implement the local permitting process. The operator owns the system and the assets for the 2-year pilot period. And if we were to continue after that, additional subsidy would be required to the operator. There is a 90-10 revenue split where we would receive 10% of revenue from rides and memberships to be able to reinvest into the program, either during the pilot period or to continue it afterward. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Amber to talk more about the company and the proposed system.
Thank you, Dana, and hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. My name is Amber Wasson, and I lead partnerships for Drop Mobility. I'm really excited to be here tonight to speak with you all, and even more excited that we were selected as the vendor to be a partner in the system. Next slide, please. The one that has the team photo. Perfect. One back. So just to tell you a little bit about Drop Mobility, we have been 10 plus years in this business, growing micro mobility in cities. We have over 25 markets across North America. We take a very flexible approach to the product, so we worked in tandem and will continue to work in tandem with stakeholders to design a system that works best for your community. Everything we do is white labeled, so you'll never see a drop bike on the road anywhere, and we will work in tandem with stakeholders in your community to brand this system. And so that's still a work in progress, but it will be something local that we collaboratively design and select together. And so as we go forward, we'll talk a little bit more about the plan to roll out, but we have a sustainable and deployed approach to deploying assets instead of just dropping, you know, lots and lots and lots of bikes everywhere and saturating. Rather, we want to work with the community to roll out in a phased and responsible approach. So finally, we have a lot of experience working across multiple jurisdictions to pull together a system. And we often work regionally, and we believe very much in working with transit and integrating. So we're really excited to work along the smart transit line. Finally, user pricing will be a collaborative discussion as well. And so we'll come up with pricing that both, you know, helps drive revenue to the system, but also is affordable for community members. And we'll be implementing an equity solution as well for anyone who needs a little extra assistance. Next slide, please. Everything we do is in a partnership approach. So I mentioned the collaborative approach earlier. I'll be the project manager for this project, and we'll be holding regular stakeholder meetings for all of the partner communities and working together to design a system that is most effective and will be most successful for you guys. Next slide. Here are just some pictures of other markets we operate. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see a map of our systems across the US. We are growing. We're in US and Canada, and then we partner on some systems in Europe as well. I think what's important to highlight here is just the experience we're able to draw from other systems and bring to your community. So that's one of my favorite parts of my job, is I get to see what works and what doesn't work, and then cross-pollinate that and bring the success to other communities. So just to describe a bit about how this will work. So the drop operating model is very flexible, and we create hubs using infrastructure These are basically bike racks. They can be any form, so we can match, you know, a streetscape that you might have in your town. We can use existing bike racks, or we can design them and brand them to the system. And then you'll see in the pictures on the right of the slide, there's signage that marks the hub locations and gives some instructions. And all of this is run through our user-facing app that I will show in a minute on a slide, where you can check out the bikes from these hub locations. We'll work together with the partner communities to decide where these hub locations go. I know there's been some siting work done in the past, and we'll use that and then use our own expertise to help hone where those locations are. I also want to mention that these hubs are really easy to add and move. The infrastructure is really light, and all of the software can be done in a matter of minutes or seconds. So we can always, you know, if there's a special event, or if we want to try a hub location for a little while to see if it's effective, we can do that really easily. It can be nimble. And so we can keep working together to find success together. There will be, in addition to the individual hubs where you can check out and return bikes, there will be a greater coverage area, service area that will be, you know, all up and down, encompassing the different partner communities where users can use the system. So that'll be demarcated in the app as well. And next slide. This slide shows a picture of the bike. This is obviously a blank slate that we'll design together. There are a bunch of features here. I won't bore you with all the tech specs. I think the most exciting thing is that Isabel is there with a bike, and she'd love to give you a demo, give you a test ride if you want, answer any questions you might have. She can also point out to you where all of the opportunities are for branding. And then also, I'll just mention that with branding, we can talk about potentially involving sponsors, local businesses, and there's some real estate, you know, on the bike itself, but also on the basket, where those ad panels can be easily swapped out in case there's a special event or a short-term sponsor. Those things come in really handy. So definitely check that out in person. And this slide shows a user-facing app. I think most of us at this point have probably used a bike share app at some point, maybe definitely used an app. It's very easy to download. We'll have our own, again, custom branded app once we decide on that brand in the App Store, in the iTunes App Store and Google Play. And users will be able to download that app. They can check out, they can see where all the bikes are on a map. They can check out a bike, and the app has user payment processing right in it. They can store a credit card and purchase memberships and use that app as freely as they want. And finally, just to summarize, Dana mentioned this earlier, but the plan is to begin this summer starting with 300 e-bikes. We'll figure out where those hubs exactly are, but they'll be along the SMART train line and in partner communities. We'll figure out what our brand is, and we'll build the white label app and the software. We have a turnkey operations solution. We're active. We are operators ourselves, and we also partner with other active operators. So we are very experienced in doing this and excited to come collaborate with stakeholders in your community to make this happen. We'll help with marketing and outreach. We'll throw a big launch event. We have an in-house customer service team that will handle all, user issues and outreach and education as well. We'll work with you guys to design the equity program. We'd love your help in working with SMART to do transit integration. And finally, doing all of this with a partnership mindset and making sure we're reaching the goals of the local community. And with that, I think we have a little timeline here. We talked briefly about that, but basically looking to launch in early summer. And most of what has to happen between now and then is a lot of collaborative discussion to figure out exactly what this system will look like. So thank you, and I'll hang around if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Amber. With that, I will ask if there are any members of the public, either in person or via Zoom, who wish to comment on this item.
Alrighty, so we have Zeno who wishes to speak. Zeno, I've commanded you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yeah, I had a question about the transit integration. Have you had contact with the 3 transit operators in the county, and how do you see that happening?
Thank you, Zena. Next we have is Rick Lutman. Rick, I've commanded you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Drew. Yeah, this is Rick Lutman. I'm the League of Women Voters appointee to the Citizens Advisory Committee. I wanted to ask about your equity program, because it sounds like to make effective use of this program, a user would essentially have to have an iPhone and credit cards. What would you do for low-income people who might not have access to these modern facilities for communication? Is there some way somebody could rent the bike, or could pay for the bike, and without actually having to use an iPhone? Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Dr. Hopkins, I don't see any of the members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
Great, thank you. And I'm wondering if Dana or Amber would be the best person to answer those questions.
So I can take the first question about transit integration and then hand it over to Amber for the second. So as Zeno was asking about integrating with the 3 transit operators in the county, I'm assuming that's referring to the bus operators. We are definitely looking at bus stops and major hubs as connecting points as well. We reference SMART a lot because that was kind of a big impetus for our grant application, really looking at that first last mile connection, but that also applies to bus transit as well. We will be working closely with them and making sure that the bus hubs have connections to the bike hubs and are co-located as well. So, and there may be some properties, where that are owned by those transit operators as well that we may need to locate the hubs. And then I will just turn over to Amber if you could address the equity program question about alternatives to checking out the bikes with an iPhone and need for a credit card, and if there's other markets where you've been able to provide an alternative.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I'm glad it was asked. For users who may not have a smartphone or maybe unbanked, we have several alternatives. One very simple low-tech solution is a text-based to unlock system that we could either set up for cell phones that are not smartphones but are cell phones, or we could even have we could work with the partner communities to have some sort of retail walk-in where someone could administer that text to unlock. For a longer term solution, we are really excited to work with transit to integrate, and we also have RFID technology. So for those who are unfamiliar, that's basically the technology in tap cards. So that's something that is not in the current scope of the project, but something that long term we could incorporate and eventually maybe even integrate into existing transit passes. For the unbanked members of the community, we do have a really easy solution is to allow prepaid credit cards. And so that's something that our system currently allows. We can also opt to take cash. That would just involve, again, working with local communities to set up retail locations where someone could walk in and pay with cash, or perhaps partner with transit and be able to take cash at other fare boxes or places. So I hope that answers your question. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm personally very passionate about this topic. Would love to talk. talk further.
Excellent questions, Rick and Zeno. With that, I'll bring it back to the board and acknowledge Director Bagby.
Yeah, I know that the Lyft has a program where that integrates with Clipper Card, and that is what we are standardizing on, across our transit agencies. So I think that there would be a strong interest for that, but also having being able to pass out loaded like gift cards or credit cards, and being able to give those out to our unbanked community for use. I think there would be strong interest for that. I know there would be some interest possibly, down the road when we see this program. I'm very excited about seeing this program grow. I also serve with Director Rabbit on SMART, and I know that this is key for our last mile plans. But I also was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail. It looks like are you the Breckenridge provider in Breckenridge, Colorado?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and it looks like a great program. I've actually vacationed there with my husband's family, and all we didn't get in a car for over a week. We actually this was the last time we were there. It was right when e-bikes were becoming much more popular, but we just basically spent the time on our bikes going from city to city in that area. And it's one of the best models of dedicated bike lanes, and what it can really do for a place that used to be a ski destination, and it became a year-round destination with the addition of the being able to bicycle from city to city in the summer. And I'm sure Dana has talked with you about, we're also the site of the Great Redwood Trail. So while right now we have the necessity of providing that last mile connectivity to SMART and to our bus services, there's also a tremendous opportunity when the Great Redwood Trail extends all the way from Larkspur to Humboldt Bay in the very, very northern California. So I'm very excited about this project and hope that we'll also see some opportunities at our cities that are rolling out Great Redwood Trail as well. But yeah, I can't wait. I'm hoping that I was disappointed when you finally said it'll be rolling out in early summer, because we actually have a bike tour with SMART board members and members of the Bicycle Coalition coming up in January. And I'm going to figure out a way to get myself another e-bike for that, because I do not want to ride my mountain bike from Santa Rosa to Petaluma, as much as I love that bike. So, but I'll have to wait until I can actually use it to tour portions of the SMART Trail. But I'm really looking forward to being a user of the system as well.
Director Okrepke.
Thank you. For maintenance and collection, is your system similar to like that of Lime or Bird, where it's like a local franchise individual is responsible for all of that? Or do you do it out of your company?
We're a little bit different in that it's similar to that. We'll be hiring a local team, but we'll be directly managing and overseeing that local team. So within our drop HQ, we have California operations manager who oversees all of our California markets. And then as soon as we start working this spring, we'll be establishing a local workshop, hiring a local team. So not really a franchise model, but rather a local operating team model.
Great. I'm glad to hear that, because the city of Santa Rosa, our electric scooter program fell apart because we couldn't find that local individual to run it. So I'm glad to hear that this is more of a larger scale operation with local employees rather than franchised out and relying on one local individual or two.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other comments or questions from my colleagues? Great point, Director Bagby, about the Clipper card and sort of possible integrations. And I also love the idea, especially of some kind of a big launch, and then working potentially with some of our local nonprofits or, service providers, offering giveaways of kind of preloaded cards in some way, shape, or form to support folks being able to utilize this new option. So with that, this is an action item, and so entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Ooh, tie goes to. We'll give it to Director Hader Thompson by a hair, because she appointed you to the ad hoc earlier that I have no ability to appoint you to, so it's all fair, right? With that, Drew, would you mind please calling the roll?
Certainly. Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Hader Thompson.
Yes.
Director Corsi is absent. Director Harvey.
Yes.
Director Hinton.
Aye.
Director Kelly has left. Director O'Cuffey.
Aye.
Director Rabbit. Aye. And Vice Chair Williams.
Yes.
And you guys pass it.
Thank you so much, Dana, for an excellent presentation. And thank you so much, Amber, as well. This is a really exciting opportunity, and I can't wait to see these on bike trails near us. It's very, very exciting. So with that, we're going to move on to our reports and announcements. We've got the advisory committee agendas. Anything to add there, James? All good. Do you want to just segue right into the executive committee report?
Sure. So our executive committee, we had Vice Chair Hopkins as well as Director Rabbit was in attendance to discuss the regional transportation measure polling that came out last Friday at MTC's legislative committee. Kind of highlights from that are that the initial polling shows support just above 50% for a regional measure in 2026 is what they're looking for, as well as looking at legislation in 2025. We had additional discussion about the climate ad hoc report out, which you heard Tanya just describe. There's an update on the legislative advocacy RFP, of which we have received our proposals and will be to the board in February at our February 5th meeting for contract award. We discussed Highway 37 governance, as well as our 2024 calendar and our draft February board agenda. That concludes the ad hoc report out. The executive committee report.
Great. And do we have any regional agency reports that anyone would like to share? David, Melanie, Janice? David?
One that I think is of interest to this body at the joint MTC Planning Committee, ABAG Administrative Committee last Friday. We have priority conservation areas. We've had those, and that was a carve out that we got in the North Bay because we're not eligible, nor will we get the same amount of money as some of those larger urban counties. So this is a way to bring a little additional dollars up our way. The feds don't like sub-regional allocations in a competitive process. So what staff did is that we set targets. They set a target in the first round, but not the second round, but we convinced them otherwise on Friday to set the target at 50% to the North Bay counties for the 2 years. And that's a total of over $8 million. So that's a good thing, we hope. And we'll hopefully some of those dollars will end up here in Sonoma County. And James mentioned the polling that was presented. The other thing is that the Bay Pass, which I think we've all been partners on in terms of the colleges, we signed the first contract with an employer, and it was UCSF for nearly $5 million. So look for an additional expansion of the Bay Pass for free transit passes. This data that's shown on the college ones is that the ridership has gone up and the revenue has gone up unbelievably, that you can give out a free pass and actually increase revenue, but it's all the other traveling that goes on with those individuals as well. So it'll be interesting going forward to see how those numbers align, but it helps with the transit crisis that we're all in the midst of. We did talk about going forward with the polling and talk briefly in our executive body regarding bold changes needed at in terms of transit to really ensure the public is there to support transit going forward. So lots of conversations about how to fix transit going into the future.
Thank you so much. Anything else to add from any of my colleagues? Seeing none, that takes us to the SCTA RCPA activities reports. We've got marketing and communications. Ross, anything to update us on?
Yes, a brief update. Good afternoon, directors. Following is a brief overview of communications and outreach activity during the previous month. SCTA staff attended events for the launch and completion of two important transportation projects that SCTA supported. The Smart Petaluma North groundbreaking had significant attendance and a host of esteemed speakers. This station will greatly improve access and the smart experience in general in Petaluma. The other event was the Caltrans Gleason Beach realignment project, which is one of the first major projects in the region specifically implemented by Caltrans to combat the effects of climate change, in this case, sea level rise. Staff has also been working to improve the Resilient 37 webpage, just to increase accessibility and the user experience for all. This page is used to compile SR 37 meeting information, as well as host plans, content from the various agencies involved. In improving the route to mitigate flooding and congestion. The improvements are in response to comments by elected officials during the most recent policy committee meeting, asking about ease of navigation and clarity. And lastly, an SCTA staff member, which would be me, attended media relations training conducted by the County of Sonoma for some tips and insider techniques on distributing press releases, digital media, and achieving success in interviews. And that was a very, very valuable training. And that is actually it for right now. Please, thank you for your time. And please let me know if you have any questions about these or any other communications topics.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? And actually, any questions or comments from members of the public? And I forgot to ask on the other report outs, but anything on that either?
None.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Ross. Really appreciate it. With that, Tanya, anything to add?
And I will keep this very brief because you've already heard a lot from our CPA about what we've been working on the last month. But there are two things I wanted to highlight or update you on. First, related to our Bay Run programs and our new Bay Run liaison service. I'm pleased to share that Anna Oliva, who is our new Bay Run program specialist, has completed all of her interviews with city staff to learn more about city climate priorities and needs and start identifying ways that we can better promote and work with city staff on those Bay Run programs to really increase the uptake on those incentives and rebates that you were discussing earlier. So we're really excited that that's underway, and we'll share the key learnings from that with you at a future board meeting. And then second, related to funding, just wanted to give a quick update on the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. So as you may recall, RCPA has been a representative for Sonoma County on the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's effort to develop the Bay Area Regional Priority Climate Action Plan. And so we continue to participate in that. And we did receive confirmation that actually the Air District is working with the EPA to make sure that the boundaries for their priority climate action plan will include at least the Sonoma County jurisdictions within the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's boundaries. So most of our Sonoma County will be able to apply for projects under that priority climate action plan, with the exception of those that are served by the Northern Sonoma County Air Pollution Control District. And then second, related to this EPA grant, there is also a request from the state. The state is also developing a statewide priority climate action plan, and they're asking local jurisdictions to coordinate a county response. So RCPA, we're working with your staff and your jurisdictions to identify the top 1 to 4 climate projects that we would like the state to consider including in its overall plan. And so we're working on getting those submissions compiled and back to the state by next week. So that's the other thing that we're working on. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you so much. Any questions from my colleagues? So just for clarification, that Bay Area Air Quality Management one, that was the one that we previously thought was going to be restricted to just the MSA or what, and so that we would not, okay, that's really, really exciting news. That's a big deal because I had a lot of conversations with staff where, you know, the Air District was making this huge investment, but it was not going to be available to all the counties, specifically not the sort of more rural suburban ones. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for that update.
Thank you.
With that, any members of the public have any questions or comments on this one? Seeing none, wonderful. We will move on to Chris and the planning update.
Good afternoon. I'll keep this brief as well and just hit some of the high points. So starting off with our modeling and analysis program, Adam's been walking through an update on the travel demand model and current travel trends with our advisory committees. And the goal of doing this is really to work with local staff on guiding the future of our forecasting and making sure we're meeting not only SCTA goals and objectives, but also the needs of our local jurisdictions. So that'll be ongoing throughout the rest of this year. So excited about that. So moving on to SB 743 implementation and VMT. So as I announced a few months ago, we received a Caltrans Sustainable Communities planning grant to actually look into a VMT mitigation banking and exchange program for Sonoma County. So we're working on RFP materials for that, which will be released early next year. So we'll be working with a committee from local jurisdictional staff and SCTA staff to select a consultant and hope to bring back a consultant selection and contract for you to review and consider approving, hopefully in March. So that's the current timeline. So looking forward to that project as well. Moving on to the active transportation plan, there's been a lot of work going on over the last month or so. Dana especially has spearheaded this effort, and we've held technical staff level workshops in Healdsburg, Cloverdale, Roanoke Park, Sonoma, unincorporated county, and also Cotati to look at analysis, including level of walking and biking stress, and to review initial route recommendations. We've also held a couple pop-up community events. So Ross, I think, has been at both of those, one in Cloverdale Farmers Market and one in Roanoke Park. And then the online survey and map survey attached to the active transportation plan was active in November, it wrapped up, and we received over 1,000 comments. So looking forward to seeing the results of that. So a lot of outreach, a lot of responses back in. So it'd be good to review those results. Looking over to the region, we've also been working with MTC and ABAG on the Community Action Resource and Empowerment Program, or the CARE program. So this is an evolution of the Lifeline Transportation Planning or Funding Program, and it's looking to award 21 million in funding across the region. It's really focused on implementing transportation projects that are identified as high priorities in underserved neighborhoods. So we've done some planning associated with this in Sonoma County as part of the community-based transportation planning program. So we'll be leaning on that to identify projects that could be eligible for this program. So we'll have more information on that hopefully at our next meeting. There's been a little bit of movement on the transit-oriented communities policy front. So MTC is actually providing some technical assistance in this area. They've hired some consultant support, urban planning partners to actually help out with this. So there's actually a working group in the North Bay that's assembled. Adam was able to attend that, and they discussed what types of technical assistance would be appropriate and needed, and also reviewed a TOC policy checklist. So there's some support going forward there, and it is needed. So with that, there are additional items in the activities report. We'd be happy to answer any questions there and take any comments or questions at this point.
Great. I'm hoping that of those 1,000 plus comments, at least a few hundred are from West County, because I literally was at every single town hall with QR codes that linked to the survey. So I hope we got some good participation there. Any questions from my colleagues or any comments, and any questions or comments from members of the public, either in person or online?
No hands are raised.
Seeing none, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate the update and looking forward to the next steps. And that brings us to our final activities report, projects and programming. David, thanks so much.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and good evening, directors. For the projects program team, we had a busy month. Back on November 14th, we hosted staff from the California Transportation Commission to do a workshop on the active transportation funding program. Had over 60 participants online and in person, and had a real good turnout. Had good feedback on our past funding applications for projects in the county and what we can do better. On the 15th, we followed that up with a driving tour with CPC staff, where we went up to Healdsburg to talk about the smart pathway extension, over to West Sebastopol and down to the Moreland area of the county, Runner Park, Petaluma, and then finally ending in the Springs area of the county, just north of the city, Sonoma, to look at 6 different project sites. It was a real good tour, got good feedback on a lot of projects with local agency staff and CPC staff. Last week, the CPC voted to approve 50 million from the local transportation climate adaptation program for Highway 37. That work is specifically going towards replacing the Tully Creek Bridge just east of Highway 121 with a new longer bridge that will more tidal flows to that area to help stave off climate change, and also looking at restoring some areas of marsh in Solano County. So that's the real first big discretionary grant for Highway 37 that the Resilient 37 team has gotten. So we're very happy about that. Hopeful for future grants. Coming up, we are going to be having groundbreaking ceremonies for the Hearn Avenue interchange and the 116 and 121 interchange coming up probably March of next year. We're still figuring out dates, but that's what we're penciling in right now. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions? Any comments from members of the public?
Also, 2 follow-up items from earlier. The Mirabel project in Forestville, that project is receiving both the 2 million of Measure M LSP funds and some Measure M bike bed funds along with Sonoma funds to install Class 2 bike lanes and a Class 1 path in Forestville from the Youth Park to 116. And then on the smart pathway from airport to North Santa Rosa, that project is programmed next fiscal year. Smart Board had to vote to move the Measure Q funds that were using as match for that grant off to fund the shortfall on the Windsor extension, but we're hopeful to be able to work with the Smart Board to hold fund that project next fiscal year.
Great. Thank you so much. Any announcements from my colleagues? Director Bagby?
No announcement, but I just want to commend SCTA, RCPA staff. You kind of alluded to it in your different reports, but you have been out in the field. Great way to get out and do outreach. And I just want to say from the city of Cloverdale, thank you so much for coming all the way up to Cloverdale to do outreach at our farmers market, and also, you know, their presence at the smart station meeting in Healdsburg. It was very valuable, and thanks for all of the other work that you've done to get out into the different regions. And it's just great to be able to see staff and connect with you and watch you as you connect with our community members post-COVID. It's a very valuable thing. And I just want to thank you for your leadership on that and look forward to seeing you at future meetings.
Any other announcements? I just want to echo that and say thanks. It was really great to see James and also actually Suzanne out at the Gleason Beach ribbon cutting, which took place just after our last meeting, and really exciting project to finally get. I mean, this is sort of 100-year project. I feel like that's what it's built for, is 100 years of sea level rise and coastal erosion, and in partnership with our tribes moving forward to protect cultural heritage, restore the environment, and actually increase open space, and also get a nice chunk of the California Coastal Trail out of it as well. So very exciting. With that, thank you all for getting through a really meaty meeting. Hopefully I did okay as fake chair. And have a wonderful evening. This meeting is adjourned.